Clint Eastwood was standing on the red carpet at the 2004 Academy Awards, surrounded by photographers and journalists. He'd just won his second Oscar for directing Million Dollar Baby, and at 73 years old, he was at the absolute peak of his career. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and then, through the crowd, a woman approached him with an old photograph in her hand. What she said next stopped the Hollywood legend in his tracks and changed his understanding of his own life forever. The year was 1954. Clint Eastwood was 24 years old, broke and desperate. He'd just signed a $75 a week contract with Universal Studios, playing bit parts in monster movies that nobody would remember. He was involved with a local theater group in Los Angeles, trying to improve his acting skills, hoping to catch a break that seemed further away every single day. That year, a young woman in that same theater group discovered she was pregnant. She knew the father was Clint, but she also knew something else. Clint was married. He'd recently wed Maggie Johnson, and his life was already complicated enough. Telling him about the baby would destroy everything he was trying to build. So she made a decision that would echo through 5 decades. She would have the baby and give it up for adoption. She would never tell Clint, and she would carry that secret for the rest of her life. On February 11, 1954, a baby girl was born. Her name was Lori. She was placed with a loving couple in Seattle, Clyde and Helen Warren, who raised her as their own daughter. They gave her a wonderful childhood, a stable home, and all the love any child could want. But they also told her the truth. She was adopted, and somewhere out there she had biological parents she'd never met. As Lori grew up in Seattle through the 1960s and 70s, something strange was happening. Her biological father, whose name was listed on her sealed adoption papers as Clint Eastwood, Jr., was becoming one of the most famous men in America. While Lori played in her backyard in Seattle, Clint was squinting at bad guys in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns. While she attended high school, Clint was becoming Dirty Harry, the cop who defined a generation. While she went to college and started her own family, Clint was winning Academy Awards and directing masterpieces, and neither of them had any idea the other existed. Lori always wondered about her biological parents. Every adopted child does. She'd look in the mirror and wonder whose eyes she had, whose smile, whose mannerisms. But the adoption records were sealed. The agency wouldn't release information. All she had was a name on some old paperwork that her adoptive parents had shown her once, Clint Eastwood, Jr. It was a common enough name. It could have been anyone. It wasn't until Lori was in her 30s, married with children of her own, that she decided to search. By then, it was the early 1990s, and Clint Eastwood wasn't just famous, he was a living legend. But Lori had no reason to connect that Clint Eastwood with her biological father. Millions of people shared common names. What were the odds? She hired a private investigator anyway. The search took months. Old records had to be tracked down. Sealed documents had to be accessed through legal channels. Birth certificates had to be cross-referenced. And then, one ordinary afternoon, Lori sat in her living room and opened the envelope containing her biological father's information. She read the name once, then again, then a third time, her hands starting to shake. Clint Eastwood, Jr., born May 31, 1930, in San Francisco, California. Father was Clint Eastwood, Sr., a manufacturing executive. Mother was Ruth Runner Eastwood. It was him. Her biological father was Clint Eastwood, the Clint Eastwood, the man whose movies she'd watched, whose face was on magazine covers, who'd won Oscars and directed classics. That Clint Eastwood was her father. Lori couldn't process it. For days, she walked around in a daze, unable to tell anyone, unable to even wrap her mind around what this meant. How do you call up one of the most famous men in the world and tell him he has a daughter he never knew about? What if he rejected her? What if he thought she was lying, trying to extort him for money? What if he didn't want anything to do with her? But Lori wasn't interested in money or fame. She just wanted to know her father. After months of agonizing over the decision, she reached out through Clint's representatives with a simple message. She wasn't asking for anything except the truth, and maybe, if he was willing, a chance to meet. The message made its way through layers of assistants and managers until it reached Clint himself. When he read it, he went very quiet. People close to him said he seemed shocked, but not entirely surprised. Clint had lived a complicated life in his 20s. There were relationships he'd had before he was famous, romances that had ended abruptly when his career started taking off. The idea that one of those relationships had resulted in a child he never knew about was jarring, but in a strange way it made sense. What shocked everyone was what Clint did next. He didn't hire lawyers to verify the claim. He didn't demand a DNA test. He didn't try to make the problem go away quietly with money. Instead, he picked up the phone himself and called Lori. That first conversation was awkward and emotional and beautiful all at once. Neither of them has ever shared the details publicly, but people close to the situation describe it as two people who'd been searching for something they didn't even know they'd lost, finally finding it. Clint asked questions about her life, her childhood, her family. Lori told him about the Warrens, about growing up in Seattle, about how well she'd been treated by her adoptive parents. She made it clear she wasn't looking to replace the parents who'd raised her or to insert herself into his life in any dramatic way. She just wanted to know him. And Clint, a man famous for being closed off and private, opened up in a way that surprised even him. He told her about his early struggling years, about not knowing she existed, about how sorry he was that he'd missed her entire childhood. "When I met my dad, it was love at first sight," Lori would later tell Carmel magazine, her voice thick with emotion. "He is a wonderful man, and we have unconditional parent-child love for each other." They arranged to meet in person, away from cameras and publicity. When they finally stood face to face, the resemblance was undeniable. Lori had Clint's eyes, his distinctive jawline, that same thoughtful expression. For Clint, looking at her was like looking at a ghost from his past, a living reminder of a life he'd lived before fame changed everything.
Friends say that Clint, a man who rarely showed emotion publicly, broke down crying when he embraced his daughter for the first time. He kept saying, "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry I missed everything." And Lori, just as emotional, kept telling him, "You didn't know. Neither of us knew, but we know now." What makes this story truly remarkable is what happened after that first meeting. Many celebrity parent-child reunions are brief, awkward encounters followed by settlements and separation, but Clint and Lori were determined to build something real. Clint introduced her to his other children, her half-siblings, Kyle, Allison, Scott, Francesca, Morgan. All of them welcomed her into the family. There was no jealousy, no resentment. She was simply their sister, the one they'd never known about. Clint invited Lori to family events. He made her part of his life in every meaningful way. For a man who'd been criticized throughout his life for having a complicated personal life, for being distant with some of his children, this was a chance to do things right from the very beginning. "I've thoroughly enjoyed becoming part of a much larger family," Lori said in an interview years later. "It's been an incredible journey." For years, they kept their relationship private. Clint's other children knew about Lori, his close friends knew, but the media had no idea. Clint was protective of her privacy and her normal life. She was a school teacher, not a celebrity, and he wanted to keep it that way. Then came that night at the 2004 Academy Awards. Clint had won Best Director and Best Picture for Million Dollar Baby, a film about a boxing trainer who becomes a father figure to a young fighter and ultimately makes an impossible sacrifice out of love. The themes of fatherhood, redemption, and second chances weren't lost on anyone who knew Clint's personal story with Laurie. As Clint stood on the red carpet after his win, Laurie was there. She'd attended as his guest, but most people didn't know who she was. A photographer captured the moment when Clint saw her in the crowd. His usually stoic face broke into a genuine smile, the kind of smile a father gives his daughter when he's proud of her for just being there. He pulled her close, put his arm around her, and in that moment, in front of hundreds of cameras, Clint Eastwood publicly acknowledged his eldest child for the first time. The photo made it into some magazines, and slowly, quietly, the story began to emerge. But Clint and Laurie didn't make a big announcement. They didn't do press tours or interviews. They simply continued building their relationship, one family dinner at a time, one phone call at a time, one holiday gathering at a time. In 2018, at the premiere of his film The Mule, Clint walked the red carpet with Laurie by his side, along with several of his other children. The family stood together, united, as photographers snapped away. For anyone who knew the backstory, it was a powerful moment. The eldest daughter, who'd been a secret for decades, was now standing proudly with her father at a Hollywood premiere. "He's always been there for me since we reconnected," Laurie has said. "He's made up for lost time in the best way possible, by being present now."
Clint, now 94 years old, has said in private conversations that finding Laurie was one of the unexpected gifts of his later years. For a man who built a career playing solitary cowboys and tough guys who needed no one, the experience of opening his heart to a daughter he never knew he had was transformative. In his films, Clint often played characters haunted by the past, seeking redemption for old mistakes. In Unforgiven, his character was a retired gunslinger trying to escape his violent history. In Million Dollar Baby, he played a trainer trying to make amends for being estranged from his own daughter. In Gran Torino, he was a widower learning to connect with people after a lifetime of isolation. Those themes weren't accidents. They were reflections of Clint's own journey, his own understanding that the past shapes us but doesn't have to define us, that it's never too late to make things right. And Laurie gave him that chance, not through grand gestures or Hollywood endings, but through the simple act of showing up, being patient, and allowing a relationship to develop naturally. Today, Laurie lives a quiet, private life. She's not seeking the spotlight. She's not trying to leverage her connection to one of Hollywood's biggest legends. She's simply a woman who found her biological father later in life and built a genuine relationship with him. She joins Clint several times a year at his beloved Mission Ranch in Carmel, California. They have dinner together, share stories, and make up for the decades they lost. Clint, who owns the historic property, seems more relaxed when Laurie is around, more willing to open up and share the parts of himself he usually keeps hidden. "People ask me if I'm angry that I didn't know my dad growing up," Laurie has said, "but I'm not. I had wonderful adoptive parents who loved me unconditionally, and now, in this chapter of my life, I have my biological father too. How many people get to say they're that blessed?" The story of Clint Eastwood and Laurie Murray reminds us that family isn't always about who was there from the beginning. Sometimes it's about who shows up and stays. It's about second chances and forgiveness and the courage to open your heart even when you're terrified of being hurt. Clint showed his greatest strength not by playing tough guys or winning showdowns on screen, but by being vulnerable enough to embrace a daughter he never knew existed, by being humble enough to admit he'd missed out on something precious, and by being committed enough to make every remaining day count. At the 2018 premiere of The Mule, a reporter asked Clint what it was like having Laurie in his life.
Clint, never one for long speeches, simply smiled and said, "She's wonderful. I'm a lucky man." And Laurie, standing beside him, wiped away tears. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. It's not about fame or Hollywood or Academy Awards. It's about a father and daughter who found each other against impossible odds and chose love over fear, connection over comfort, and presence over perfection. If this story of second chances and unconditional love moved you, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to open your heart. Have you ever reconnected with someone you thought you'd lost forever? Let us know in the comments and ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the humanity behind Hollywood's biggest legends.